welcome to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be doing my December TBR. So I haven't posted much in the last month. I have been doing a coding boot camp and has been keeping me extremely busy. So I only managed to read 2 books in November, which is, I don't think that's my worst month, but it's pretty close as far as reading goes. I do have a couple weeks off of school in December, and I am going to be participating in the Reindeer Games, which is the winter shelf space readathon. It's thankfully a little less intense this time because the teams definitely got more intense, and this works better for me this time around. So I'll be talking about all of the prompts that I picked for. As a heads up, I picked a book for each prompt for the readathon. I am not going to be reading 25 books or whatever that ends up at. I just wanted to have choices for myself, and I figured that if I talk about them, maybe it'll give anybody else who's participating some ideas on what they might want to read. So don't expect me to read all of these, but I definitely would like, I'm hoping for 2 bingos. If I can get that much done, I'll be happy, especially since I do have some time off. So, I also have, I think, just 1 book that I can't fit into. No, I'll probably have 2 books that I'm not going to be fitting into prompts because they're carryovers from November that I started but didn't finish. So those won't be part, I'll talk about those at the very end since they're not part of the readathon. So without further ado, I will get into the prompts themselves and use my handy iPad so I can keep track of all of these. And I will post a picture with the bingo board in case you're interested in that. I will also post a link to the Shelf Space Discord so that you can check out the readathon if you want a kind of more low-key reading challenge. And more details on how that works. If I remember correctly, the way that the readathon is working is that you get an entry into a book giveaway for each one of the bingos that you get up to a limit of, I believe, 3. But check the official rules to see what the details are on that. So, and I'm just gonna go row by row through the list, so you'll see exactly what I'm talking about here in a minute. So the first one is White Christmas, which is a book with white on the cover. And for that, I picked The Air Affair by Jasper Fforde. I have been meaning to read this for a really long time. As far as I understand it, it's kind of like a mystery with some fantastical elements in it because it involves literary characters and someone having to kind of travel through books to track them down. I am sorry if that's a terrible description. All I know is that it's supposed to be humorous and literary, and it's been on my list for a long time to read, but I have never gotten to it. It is thankfully not too long, so I'm really hoping I'll get to that one. Then I have, then there's Taming of the Scrooge, which is to read a classic. For this one, I picked Frankenstein. I am participating in the buddy read over on Evie's Discord. I'll post a link to her channel below, and we're reading the 1818 version of Frankenstein in December, so this fit perfectly. I almost never read classics, I'll admit, but I am looking forward to finally getting to Frankenstein. The next one is O Tannenbaum, a book set in a forest. This one worked out perfectly because I am also participating in Evie's read-along of the Winter Night trilogy, which is one of my favorite series ever. I have such a love for this one. I read this as it came out, basically, so in the last couple years, and absolutely loved the series. I'm really looking forward to getting back to it. I am probably going to be doing them via audiobook this time since it's nice to have audio for the reread. And the narrator is actually really good, so I'd highly recommend the audiobook for Bear and the Nightingale. Oh, and I didn't describe it. Bear and the Nightingale is Russian-inspired fantasy that follows a young girl, Vasya. The first book kind of covers her struggles to figure out where she fits in. She has connections to some of the magical creatures, like that you know from folk tales, Russian folk tales, and then a priest comes to her village and is introducing Christianity to their village and kind of trying to guide people away from believing in these kind of more mythical creatures. And it ends up causing some fairly serious repercussions for the village. And then you kind of throughout the series follow Vasya as she tries to figure out where she fits in because she doesn't want the traditional role that's usually assigned to women, and so she's kind of making her own way. If you are a fan of Neil Gaiman type storytelling where it's almost creating these new myths, drawing on already established folk tales, I think Catherine Arden does an amazing job with the whole series. Next prompt, We Three Kings, is a book with monarchy or royalty in it. And for this, I picked How Rory Thorne Destroyed the Multiverse by Kate Eason. And this is kind of a twist on fairy tales, bringing them basically into a sci-fi realm. The concept is there's this princess of a planet, and she's been blessed by a number of fairies, and one of the things that they have blessed her with is the ability to see through lies. And she ends up getting betrothed to a prince on another world and has to go into his court and basically deal with this whole conspiracy that's kind of trying to unseat him as prince. So it's supposed to be kind of funny and twist on fairy tales. I loved folk tales and fairy tales, which you may have noticed from my love of Winter Night, so I'm really looking forward to this one. Assuming I get to it. The next prompt on my list is actually a reread for me. So for Jingle Bells, which is to read an audiobook, I've picked The Hogfather. I am getting increasingly nervous about this because I can't find a pre-order link for The Hogfather that works for me. I've run into this issue before where a audiobook that's being published in the UK isn't available to me, even though it's available to other people in the US. So that's super frustrating, and I'm hopeful I can find it in time. If not, a number of these books are actually books that I'm planning on reading in audio, so I may end up having to substitute something in for that slot. I am still going to read Hogfather because Hogfather is an annual December reread for me. It is Terry Pratchett's story about basically death ends up taking over for the Discworld version of Santa Claus. It's hilarious. It's also got an amazing commentary on how people respond to myth and what people really want out of life. And it's just, I love it so much. It's one of my favorite Discworld books. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to it, even if I don't get access to the audiobook like I want. Moving on to the second row, we have Feliz Navidad, which is a book translated from another language. And for this, I picked The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is one that's been on my list forever. I keep having people tell me it's amazing. I tend not to read a lot of literary fiction, but this one really sounded appealing to me, and it was originally published in Spanish, so it fits for this prompt, and I'm hopeful I can finally get to that one. And honestly, I don't know much about the story at all, other than that it involves, I don't know anything really about the story, just that it's been recommended to me by a number of people. The next prompt is, Do You Even Dreidel, Bro? Which, I love that. That's fantastic. Is a book that involves a game. And for this, I picked Head On by John Scalzi. I may end up having to trade this out. I don't know if anybody has read Head On and Lock In, also by Scalzi. Let me know if you can read Head On before you read Lock In, because technically Head On is a standalone related to Lock In, but I don't know if it's going to matter, and I don't know if I will get to Lock In before I can manage to read Head On. So the concept The concept with lock-in was that there's this viral infection that basically, like, we all need that story right now, but viral infection who, which, wow, Caitlin, which basically, for a certain number of people who are infected by it, it makes them nearly catatonic. Like, they're still functional, but they don't have control over their bodies anymore. That's why it's called lock-in, because they're basically stuck in this unresponsive body. Lock-in takes place basically 25 years after this virus has kind of run through its course, and there's still people who have this what's called Hayden syndrome, where they no longer have control over their bodies. And the murder mystery kind of involves someone who can actually use their body to let people who are stuck in the unresponsive bodies use their body for some time, and it basically involves this murder mystery around that. Head On basically returns to that same world, same concept of Hayden syndrome. As per humanity, they've developed a specific type of game where they can use robot bodies to play this game. The idea is basically you're attacking the other players with swords and hammers, and whoever comes out on top wins the game. It's super brutal, but it's not actual bodies, it's robot bodies, and so they can kind of get away with having it be super brutal. And then one of the athletes drops dead. So then you have this kind of buddy cop to figure out what happened in this whole conspiracy around it. So it sounded really fun, but like I said, I haven't read Lock-In, so I don't know if it'll make sense for me to try and read Head On. I may end up having to substitute something else in for that, but I've had it on Kindle, both Lock-In and Head On Kindle for quite some time, and I really would like to get to them at some point here. The next prompt is A Long Winter's Night, a book with over 500 pages or a manga with over 1,000 pages. And for this, I picked Kings of the Wild, which is just barely over that 500 page limit, but I've been told it's kind of a humorous fantasy take on, like, I think 70s bands. And the concept is basically that there's all these bands, which are groups of kind of mercenaries that have made their reputation by fighting all kinds of monsters, but they're also kind of modeled on like rock bands and kind of that same atmosphere. And then the story is that one of the band members' daughter gets in trouble, and so he gets his band back together to go rescue her. And this one is by Nicholas Eames. I don't know if I remembered to say that. It sounds super fun. I could use kind of a lighter, fun read, even though that this is kind of on the longer side. So hopefully I'll get to that one. I've been really wanting to prioritize that. So I'm really hoping I can get to that one. The next one is All I Want for Christmas, which is a sci-fi story. I've heard comparisons to Murderbot for this one. It is Activation Degradation by Marina Lostetter. Editing Caitlin here to note that I got so excited talking about Activation Degradation that I forgot to mention the prompt is not for a sci-fi, it is for any book that you're excited about. Carry on. So I get the sense that it's a little less humorous than Murderbot, but I'm looking forward to checking that one out. I am very partial to AI/bot stories, so I am really hoping I like that one. Next prompt is Chesnuts Roasting on an Open Fire, which is a cozy book or comfort read. And for this one, I picked a book that I actually had recently lended to me by my boyfriend's mom, who tends to read a lot of cozy mysteries, and then she reads some classic sci-fi as well, so she ends up passing a lot of books on to me, which is super fun because we get to trade them back and forth. And for this, I picked The Cracked Spine by Paige Shelton, and this one is kind of a cozy murder mystery involving antique books, and the main character has just moved from Kansas to Edinburgh, Scotland, to work in this specific bookstore, and then ends up getting involved in this murder mystery. And it seems like cozy and fun, so I think it'll be an easy read and a good pick for this category. Then the moving to a new row, Remember, Remember, which is a book with a revolution or treasonous plot. And I originally picked Iron Widow for this, which is supposed to be kind of like a feminist take on like mech battles and Chinese history. And that sounded really good, and that's by Shirin J. Zhao. Um, but I had forgotten that I actually have a buddy read over on Gregory LaPerch's channel that I had wanted to participate in, and that is The Hammer by KJ Parker. I've been hearing a lot about KJ Parker from Alan from the Library of Alexandria, and this one sounds particularly good, so I'd really like to get to this one. So I may end up substituting The Hammer in instead of Iron Widow, but I think either would work perfectly. I don't know a ton about The Hammer. I just know that it has a sweet, I think, flintlock on the front of it, and flintlock rifle, and that it involves some kind of noble family that's been exiled to an island and revolution. So that's all I know, but it sounds really fun, so I want to get to that. The next prompt is not the Gumdrop Buttons, a book you find sweet or cute. For this, I picked a historical romance that I've had on my shelf and been wanting to get to. It is Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas. I have been reading a number of Lisa Kleypas's books throughout, God, forever. She's been writing historical kind of Regency. If you're familiar with Bridgerton, it's kind of in that same realm, different author, but same time period and same concept for the most part. And that one sounded really fun to me. It's her newest one, as far as I know. So hopefully get to that one soon. Next prompt, 'Tis the Season, a book with red or green on the cover. And for that, I picked Mexican Gothic, which is perfect because it has both red and green on the cover. It's one I've been meaning to get to for a long time, kind of a gothic horror in Mexico. It sounds really interesting. I have heard both sides. Some people really love it, some people were disappointed by it, but it's relatively short, and this one is going to be higher priority for me because I've been wanting to get to it for a long time. The next prompt is What Child Is This? A middle grade book. For that, I picked A Wolf for a Spell. And this one was just on, I was kind of just looking for fun middle grade reads. I found a Book Riot list that this one was on, and it sounded really interesting. You may notice a fairy tale theme for my reads for December because this one is also, I think it's influenced by Russian because it's the tagline here is The Girl Who Drank the Moon meets Pax in this fantastical tale of a wolf who forms an unlikely alliance with Baba Yaga to save the forest from a wicked czar. So yes, Russian. It sounded really fun, where like a wolf gets turned into a human that kind of help out this village girl that she runs into. It sounds fun. I love Russian myth, so I'm really hoping to get to this one as well. The last prompt for this row is Snow Miser, a book with an unreliable narrator or protagonist. And for that, I'm picking Pure Nessie. It's short. I would like to read Susanna Clark, and I know basically nothing about it, except that it involves a house. And that's it. That's all I know. I know literally nothing about Pure Nessie, except that people say they've really enjoyed it. Then on to a new row, Nightmare Before Christmas, which is a horror or thriller book. And for this, I picked The Helm of Midnight. I don't know anything. I know it's a blending of fantasy and horror. It's also by Marina Lostetter. And I think it involves a serial killer, if I remember correctly. But this one is a buddy read with Sharon from Sharon Dwyer. I think it's going to be over on Shelf Space. So that one should be fun. I'm not reading a ton of horror in December because I'm trying to stay light and fluffy, but that one sounded really interesting, so I'm curious to get to that one. Then the next prompt is First Noel, the first book in a series. And for this, I picked The Last Watch by J.S. Dewes. I think that's Dewes. I don't know how you say that last name, but it's supposed to be kind of like space opera where you have this um, group of less than desirable characters who are kind of on this space station at the edge of the universe and basically have to save humanity. Um, so it sounded interesting. I recently picked this up, so I'm hoping that I like it. But it's definitely the first in a series, so it counts for that prompt. The next one I have is Merry Christmas, You Filthy Animal, which is a book with a young protagonist. And for this, I picked The Library of the Dead by T.L. Hutu. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. So it involves kind of ghosts and Zimbabwean magic. And the main character basically is a ghost talker. And so she ferries messages back and forth. And then she ends up having to track down some missing children. And so this one is one that I had been interested in, and then I was given it during a book exchange over on Andrew's Wizardly Reads channel and Discord server. So I really would like to get to this. I feel guilty that I haven't gotten to this yet, even though this book exchange was months ago. So I would really like to get to that one. Celebrate Around the World, a non-European inspired fantasy. For this, I picked The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I would really like to get to this. I have never read an Indian inspired fantasy, so I really want to get to that one, but we'll just see how it goes. It is on the longer side, so I don't know if I'll be able to make time for it, but I would really like to get to that just because it would be really interesting to do a fantasy inspired by something that's not either Eastern European or like standard UK influenced. The next one is 50 Shades of Sleigh, which is a book with romance in it. For this, I picked How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson. To be honest, I almost never read contemporary romance because I tend to find it less interesting than the historical or the fantasy romance. But Michael Knipp's review of this sold me on it. I'll post that review, or link to that review in the cards in the description in case you want to check it out. But it just sounds sweet and compelling, and I enjoy Keanu Reeves, but I'm not a super fan, so I feel like I might miss out on some of the references, but it still sounds really good, so I want to check it out. Then another one that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse. The next prompt is Christmas in July, a book that takes place in summer. And for that, I picked Beach Read by Emily Henry. Again, not usually my kind of thing because it's another contemporary romance involving two writers. One is a romance writer, and one, I think he writes literary fiction, and they basically challenge each other to write in the other's style. And it sounds interesting and kind of fun, so I'm hopeful it'll work for me. I never know with contemporary romance because sometimes I enjoy it and sometimes it's just not my thing. So we'll see how this one goes. Then the next one is The Solstice Approaches, a book with witches or witchy elements. And that for that I picked The Inheritance of, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Orchidea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. I have not read anything by Zoraida Cordova, but I heard a lot of praise for this from Angela, the Literature Science Alliance, and all I know is that it's kind of magical realism involving a relative who was kind of witchy who passes away, and her family comes together to deal with her funeral. And then there's some kind of paranormal thing related to that funeral that happens. And I know it's influenced by Ecuadorian literature, I guess. So I'm curious to check that one out. I also really love the cover for that book. I'm not normally a Pink fan, but that one looks super cool, so I ended up picking it up for my Book of the Month thing. And the next prompt is Festivus, a book that makes you laugh. And for this, I picked The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. I don't know if that's how you say that. Which is kind of humorous fantasy. I don't know a ton about it. I just know that it's supposed to be funny and it's worked really well for other people and not at all for others. So I'm curious to see where I land on that. I do really love the blending of fantasy and humor, so I'm hoping it will work for me. Then the next prompt is Light a Hanukkah Candle, a book with fire or flames on the cover. And for that, I picked Arsenic and Adobo by, I think it's, what is it, Mia P. Manansala? Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. I think it's a murder mystery. I just like the cover, and I heard good things about it from both working in a bookstore and from some of the people on BookTube. So it sounded fun, and it's got fire on the cover. So that's the one I picked for that. And I know literally nothing about it, honestly. I think I kept mixing up Arsenic and Adobo with Dial A for Aunties, which I think is why I thought when I read Dial A for Aunties, I thought it was going to be more of a mystery than it was. And I think this one is more of a culinary, by this one I mean Arsenic and Adobo, is more of a culinary cozy mystery, whereas Dial A for Aunties is really not a mystery at all. It's just kind of like darkly humorous contemporary. So then, the very last prompt, we made it, is Last Christmas, a backlist title, which is the not the author's most recently published work. And for that, I picked A Memory Called Empire by Arcady Martin. This has been on my list for quite some time, again, because of Angela. And it sounds, I know it's sci-fi that has to do with an ambassador going to this other culture and colonization, and that's all I know. But it sounded really interesting, and I recently read an anthology, The Mythic Dream, which had one of Arcady Martin's stories in it, and it was so interesting and so bizarre. I don't think I've ever seen anyone take a Sumerian myth and turn it into a space opera, but it made me really want to check out what Martine does with A Memory Called Empire, because that was just so original that it really impressed me. So, now that we have made it through all of those, I'll talk about the two that I'd like to finish out that I'm still reading, and that is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I love this book. I just have been trying, I really like listening to the audiobook and reading it at the same time, and my opportunities for doing that have been very slim. But I am really enjoying it, and I would really like to finish that hopefully in the first week of December. The other one that I'm reading is The Silence of Bones by June Her. I'm reading this for the Jade's Bedtime Bookworms book club. I'll post a link to Jade's channel as well. And this one is historical fiction slash murder mystery. You may notice that I love murder mysteries in this. That's based in Korea during the Joseon dynasty. I probably brutally mispronounced that, so I'm sorry. I think Silence of Bones is hers debut, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So I'd like to finish that again, probably in the first week of December. I won't be able to count it for anything because I've already started it, but I'm really liking that. It's very interesting so far. So that is what I'm planning on reading in December. The only guarantees are Gideon and Silence of Bones. Anything else is a bonus, but I'm really hoping to make it through a couple bingos. I'll mark the sections that I'm probably going to prioritize, and then we'll see where I end up. So let me know if you are participating in the readathon, if you have any thoughts about the ones that you're going to prioritize, and anything else about your December reading that you would like to talk about. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.